In a room full of people, one woman was treated like she didn't exist. No greeting, no seat, no name. The chandeliers hung like frozen tears above polished marble floors. Crystal glasses caught the light in 1,000 directions. But in all that brightness, she stood in shadow, a black woman, alone at the back of the hall, hands folded, eyes quiet. And for 47 minutes, not a single person spoke to her. Not the servers gliding past with champagne, not the guests brushing by in silk and perfume, not even the wedding planner who looked directly at her and then looked away. But in less than 60 seconds, the groom would stop his own wedding and say something that would change how everyone in that room saw her forever. Before this story unfolds, I need you to do something. Subscribe to Black Journal Stories, like this video, and share it, because stories like this are real and they deserve to be told with truth and dignity. What you're about to witness isn't fiction. It's a reminder of what happens when we judge before we know, when we dismiss before we see. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The Henderson-Clark wedding was the kind of event people whispered about for months. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a statement. The venue? A restored estate with gardens that belonged in European postcards. The guest list? CEOs, diplomats, old money families whose names were etched into university buildings. Everything was flawless. The bride arrived in a vintage Rolls-Royce. Her dress, custom, hand-beaded, 12 months in the making, shimmered like liquid moonlight. The groom stood at the altar in a midnight blue tuxedo, his smile wide, his eyes bright. 300 guests filled the hall. Laughter echoed off vaulted ceilings. Servers moved like shadows, refilling glasses before they emptied. A string quartet played Vivaldi as sunlight poured through stained glass windows, painting the room in gold and crimson. This was wealth. This was perfection. This was control. And then she walked in. Naomi entered through the side door, not the main entrance, not announced, not expected. She wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry except a single silver bracelet. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her shoes were clean but worn at the heels. She didn't look out of place because she was underdressed. She looked out of place because no one knew why she was there. She moved quietly toward the seating area, her purse held close to her side. Her eyes scanned the room, not with nervousness, but with the careful observation of someone who had learned long ago how to read a space before entering it fully. No one greeted her. No one offered a program. No one smiled. And here's what you need to understand. Naomi didn't look surprised. She walked as though she had expected this, as though she had known from the moment she decided to come that this was how it would be. But she came anyway. And that raises a question that should unsettle you. Why would someone attend a wedding where no one wanted to acknowledge them? The ceremony ended to applause. Guests rose, stretched, adjusted their jackets and gowns. They drifted toward the reception hall, where tables were arranged like something out of a royal banquet. Centerpieces of white orchids and hanging candles, place cards written in calligraphy, menus printed on linen paper. Naomi followed at a distance. She reached the entrance to the reception hall and paused. A young woman in a sleek black suit, the wedding planner, stood near the doorway with a clipboard, checking names, directing guests to their tables. Naomi approached. "Excuse me," she said softly. The planner's eyes flicked up, scanned Naomi from head to toe, then returned to the clipboard. Name? Naomi Reeves. The planner's finger traced down the list. Once, twice. She flipped the page, flipped it back. "I don't see you here." "I was invited," Naomi said. Her voice was calm, steady. The planner's smile was professional, practiced. "I'm sure there's been a mix-up. Let me check with... Is there a problem?" A woman appeared beside them, mid-60s, diamonds at her throat, hair sprayed into submission. Her gaze settled on Naomi with the kind of coldness that doesn't need words. This was Aunt Margaret, the groom's great aunt, the family matriarch. She says she's invited, the planner explained, her tone apologetic. Margaret's lips thinned. Invited by whom? By the groom, Naomi said. Silence. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Something sharp. I see. She turned to the planner. Find her a seat. Somewhere in the back. The planner hesitated. All the tables are full, ma'am. Then make room. Margaret walked away without another glance. And here's what happened next. The planner led Naomi to a table near the kitchen doors. The chairs were mismatched. The centerpiece was smaller. This wasn't part of the planned seating. It was where staff ate during breaks. Naomi sat, and one by one, the chairs around her were quietly removed, not dramatically, not loudly. A server came by and took one, then another. By the time everyone was seated, Naomi sat alone at a table meant for 8. She didn't protest. She folded her hands in her lap and watched the room as though she were watching a play she had already seen. But here's what you need to understand. Ignoring her wasn't enough for them. They wanted her gone. The reception began with toasts. The best man stood and told stories about the groom's college days. The maid of honor spoke about the bride's kindness and grace. Glasses clinked. Laughter rolled through the room in waves. And at the table near the kitchen, Naomi sat in silence. A server passed by with a tray of appetizers, seared scallops, prosciutto-wrapped figs. The server offered them to the table beside Naomi's, then moved past her without stopping. Naomi didn't react. Another server came by, this time with champagne, filled every glass at the nearby tables, skipped hers. Still, she said nothing. Then a guest approached. A man in his 50s, red-faced from wine, gestured toward her table. Excuse me, miss. Are you with the catering staff? We need more bread at table 7. Naomi looked up at him. Her expression didn't change. I'm a guest, she said quietly. The man blinked, looked confused, then shrugged and walked away. Moments later, the wedding planner appeared. Ma'am, she said, her voice low and polite, I'm going to have to ask you to step into the hallway for just a moment. There's been some confusion about seating arrangements. Naomi didn't move. I'm fine here, she said. The planner's smile tightened. I understand, but we need to... Is there a problem? The voice came from across the room. The groom. He was standing near the head table, his hand frozen mid-gesture, his attention locked on the scene unfolding at the back of the hall. The planner straightened. No, sir. Just a small seating issue. The groom's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, and the best man grabbed his arm. Not now, man, the best man whispered urgently. You've got the first dance in 2 minutes. The groom hesitated. His eyes stayed on Naomi. She met his gaze, gave the faintest shake of her head, and he stepped back. But here's the question you should be asking. Why was the groom paying attention to someone everyone else wanted removed? Let me tell you something about Naomi Reeves. 23 years ago, she worked 2 jobs. One as a night nurse at a county hospital. One cleaning offices downtown after midnight. She lived in a studio apartment with a hot plate and a fold-out couch. Her shoes had holes in the soles that she covered with duct tape. Her coat was too thin for winter. But every month, without fail, she put money in an envelope, and she dropped it in a mailbox addressed to a boy she barely saw. She attended his school plays from the back row. She watched his basketball games from the parking lot. She sent birthday cards with no return address. She was there, but always at a distance. Why? Because she had made a promise. A promise that cost her everything. A promise that meant choosing his future over her presence, and for 23 years, she kept it. But tonight, that promise had an expiration date. Tonight he was getting married, and she had been invited, not by his family, not by his bride, by him. Naomi sat at that table near the kitchen and checked her watch. She touched the small envelope in her purse. Inside was a letter, one she had written years ago and never sent. She wasn't sure if she would give it to him tonight. She wasn't even sure if she should stay. Because here's the truth. Naomi had spent 2 decades making herself invisible so that he could shine. And now, surrounded by people who looked at her like she didn't belong. She wondered if maybe they were right. If she stayed much longer, she might not leave with her dignity intact. The first dance ended. The bride and groom swayed together under soft lights as the crowd applauded. The band transitioned into something livelier. Guests began moving toward the dance floor, and that's when the wedding planner made her move. She approached Naomi's table again. This time, she wasn't alone. A security guard stood beside her, tall, arms crossed, expression blank. The planner leaned down, her voice just above a whisper. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." Naomi looked up. "Why?" "There's been a concern raised about uninvited guests." "I was invited." "By whom?" Naomi hesitated. "By the groom." The planner's expression didn't change. "The groom is occupied. If you were truly invited, you would have been on the list. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Naomi sat still for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stood. She picked up her purse, straightened her dress, and walked toward the door. She didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't make a scene. She simply walked, because that's what she had always done. Removed herself quietly so that others wouldn't be uncomfortable. But as she reached the doorway, someone else stood, the groom. He was halfway across the room, his hand still holding his bride's, but his eyes were locked on Naomi's retreating figure. He let go. He took a step. The best man hissed his name. The bride touched his arm, confused, but he didn't stop. If you've ever been judged before being understood, if you've ever been dismissed before being seen, subscribe to Black Journal Stories and share this video, because what happens next changes everything. The groom walked to the microphone. The band stopped mid-note. Conversations faltered. Glasses were set down. 300 people turned their attention to the stage. The groom stood there, gripping the microphone, his jaw tight. "Before we go any further," he said, his voice echoing through the hall, "I need someone to come forward." The crowd murmured. People looked around, confused. Was this part of the program? A surprise? The bride stood near the head table, her expression uncertain. Aunt Margaret sat frozen, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. The groom's eyes scanned the back of the room, and then he said the name no one expected. "Naomi." Silence. "Naomi Reeves, please come here." 300 heads turned, and Naomi, standing at the exit, her hand on the door, stopped breathing. For a moment, no one moved. Naomi stood at the back of the hall, her silhouette framed by the doorway. Her hand trembled on the handle. She could leave, right now. She could walk out and let this moment pass. But the groom's voice came again, softer this time, but no less certain. "Please." And Naomi turned. The room was silent. Not the polite silence of anticipation, the heavy silence of shock. She walked. One step, then another. Her shoes clicked softly against the marble floor. Every eye in the room followed her. Whispers started, low, confused. Who is she? Why is he calling her? Is this part of the ceremony? Naomi kept her gaze forward. She didn't look at the guests staring at her. Didn't look at Aunt Margaret, whose face had gone pale. Didn't look at the wedding planner, who had backed into the shadows. She looked only at the groom. And as she walked that long aisle, longer than any bride had walked. Something shifted. People began to stand, not in applause, not in greeting, in respect. One person, then 10, then the entire room. They didn't know why, but they knew instinctively that something profound was happening. Moments earlier, she had been invisible, and now the entire room was standing. Naomi reached the stage. The groom stepped down to meet her. He took her hands. His eyes were wet. "I need to tell them who you are," he said quietly. Naomi shook her head. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He turned to face the crowd still holding her hand, and then he spoke. "Most of you know me as Marcus Henderson Clark. You know my degrees, my career, my family name. But what you don't know is that none of it would exist without this woman." The room was silent. "When I was 5 years old, my mother passed away. My father couldn't raise me alone. And Naomi, who was barely more than a girl herself, stepped in. She wasn't a nanny. She wasn't hired help. She was my mother's best friend. And she made a promise to raise me as her own." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Marcus's voice cracked. "She worked night shifts at a hospital so she could pay for my school. She worked weekends cleaning offices so I could play sports. She missed sleep, missed meals, missed her own life. And when my father remarried, when my stepmother wanted to adopt me legally, Naomi stepped back. She let me take the Henderson name. She let me be raised in wealth and privilege. She gave me up so I could have a better life." Gasps, hands over mouths, tears. But she never disappeared. Every birthday there was a card. Every graduation, she was there, at the back, where I couldn't see her. Every milestone, she watched from a distance. She paid for my college tuition, anonymously. I didn't know until last year. She sent money when I was struggling in law school. She never asked for credit, never asked for anything. Marcus turned to Naomi, his voice breaking. "Everything I'm started with you." Naomi's tears fell silently. The room erupted, not in applause, in sobs. The wedding planner approached slowly, her face ashen. I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." Naomi looked at her, said nothing. The planner backed away. Aunt Margaret sat at her table, staring at her lap. Her diamonds suddenly looked heavy. Her posture, once so rigid, had collapsed. The groom gestured toward the head table. "Naomi," he said, his voice steady now, "I'd like you to sit in the seat of honor." Naomi shook her head. "Marcus, I don't need—" "Please." She looked at him, at the bride who was crying and nodding, at the crowd who had become witnesses to something they would carry for the rest of their lives. And Naomi sat. Not at the table near the kitchen, not in the shadows, at the center. The room didn't cheer, didn't clap. It simply watched, because sometimes justice doesn't announce itself. It simply is. The wedding resumed, the band played, the guests danced, the cake was cut. But everything had changed. People approached Naomi throughout the night. They shook her hand. They thanked her. They apologized for not seeing her sooner. She accepted it all with quiet grace, because Naomi Reeves had never needed their validation. She had raised a boy who became a man who remembered, a man who honored her. And in the end, that was enough. As the night drew to a close, Marcus walked Naomi to her car. He hugged her tightly. "Thank you for coming," he whispered. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. "I'll never let you be invisible again." She smiled. "You never did, Marcus. You never did." And as she drove away, the lights of the wedding fading in her rearview mirror, Naomi Reeves felt something she hadn't felt in 23 years. Seen. Because here's the truth they don't tell you. Respect doesn't demand attention. Love doesn't need permission. And dignity never forgets. They ignored her because they didn't know her name. but love remembered. And in the end, love always does. Subscribe to Black Journal Stories. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs this reminder. Because every person you pass has a story you don't know. Every stranger has sacrificed in ways you can't see. And the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance, their silence, their place in the room, remember Naomi. Remember that respect doesn't ask permission. It reveals itself. Thank you for watching. And remember, dignity never forgets.